This is Breaking the 180, the podcast where we're diving into known and unknown waters with everything regarding the status of contemporary cinema and media, big or small screen. I'm Auteur and Hifo.
And I'm Sebastian Carrasco. And in lieu of our usual intro for the film we will be discussing today, I thought we'd do something a little different and instead hear from the director of Close Your Eyes, Victor Erice. With cinema, I maintain a relationship that I would describe as existential. What that means is that cinema, for me, is everything. It's not just a professional occupation. But this idea of the existential concerns all aspects of cinema. My work as writer and director of the film, my enjoyment as a spectator, my analysis of the cinema I see, as a teacher in the workshops. It's total.
I may be called a pedant for saying this, but Jorge Luis Borges was once asked, "What is literature?" And he responded, "It's a form of destiny." I don't know whether I can simply adopt that stance, but that is what I feel. Cinema is a form of destiny. And to say the least, that's a very potent and meaningful quote from one of the great Spanish auteurs of all time. And I know the word has been overused a lot, especially these days, this idea of the auteur, but Erice belongs to that generation of filmmakers where the word still held merit. For you cinephiles that are tuning in to this episode, you'll of course recognize the name from essentially two classic Spanish works that made his name on the international cinema terrain, The Spirit of the Beehive and El Sur, both released in the mid to late 70s and early 80s. And like many masters, he seemed to have vanished for the last 3 decades. And now he's returned to us with this masterful film, Close Your Eyes.
Arranca.
Se llamaba Julio Arenas y era actor, uno de los más admirados y queridos del cine español. Desapareció de la noche a la mañana, un día de hace 22 años, cuando estaba rodando una película.
Sigue. Me quedé sin mi mejor amigo, pero también sin película.
Algunos pensaron que a Julio le dio un pronto, una especie de ataque, y se escapó.
No era una idea tan absurda, ¿no crees? Desaparecer, no dejar ni rastro en este mundo.
As fate would have it, Erice came up in a conversation we were having, and we looked him up out of curiosity, and we saw that he had a new movie coming out this year.
We are receiving it stateside a year after the film premiered at several film festivals. It played at Cannes as well, where Erice himself had to basically protest that the movie was given a bizarre late-night slot in the screening schedule. And I don't think it's out of ego, it was more out of the fact that it almost felt like the festival was acknowledging he deserved to be screened, but they put it in the back of the line behind all these high-end, hyped-up releases that tend to dominate all the coverage of Cannes.
No, it was disrespectful.
Yeah.
I can imagine, as any filmmaker, that you would process not only a major international festival, but one of the most prestigious film festivals in the world, to kind of slight you, to basically treat your work and treat you as if you're a has-been.
Yeah, it's especially, again, with a director of his trajectory. It's not like the two films that really made his name are you can't even really call them cult classics. They're more, very acclaimed international standards. They're classics, especially of the Spanish cinema. His, Spirit of the Beehive was released in 1973. Francisco Franco was still in power in Spain. And it's this luminous film about childhood from a young girl's vantage point growing up in rural Spain, where the world around her seems dreamlike and fantastical in that way that the world seems when you're a child. And a screening of Frankenstein just changes her world in a way and changes her perceptions of reality, and in a way feeds into that growing sense that there's something dark about the adults, even of her own parents. And it's a beautiful parable about fascist Spain, but just about the growing up process in general. And it's something special about that kind of movie, because movies like that, we see that kind of cinema made today in countries like Iran, where the director is trying to say something about their society, but with ambiguity, with subtlety, with poetic flourishes, because in any other way you'll be disappeared with that midnight knock.
Yeah, and in this episode, it would be impossible to talk about Close Your Eyes without talking about his other two films.
Yeah.
Impossible. Because someone like Erice, and now that I've seen these three films, but I have yet to truly understand them. It's very rare that I watch three films, and in my case, I actually watched Close Your Eyes first, and then Spirit of the Beehive and El Sur, which are now streaming on the Criterion Collection to prepare for this episode.
Thank you, Criterion, for preserving these.
You watch these just incredibly poetic and charged and spiritual and soulful and meaningful works, just with wonder and awe, and just hoping that over the years I can rewatch them and come to understand film better, come to understand the director better, come to understand myself better, youth, innocence, the way I process the world. Very few directors have that effect on me. We've talked about this name a lot, but Tarkovsky's one of them.
Yeah.
All of his films that I've seen thus far, after the credits roll, it feels like I've just started my journey to really understand them, or come closer to understanding a fraction of the power of cinema. And a lot of Erice's work, which heavily involve film itself, literally the process of watching and internalizing film, is a huge undercurrent within these three works.
Yeah, I agree, and I would rank him with those great directors. For me, it's that sort of experience has been with filmmakers like Ingmar Bergman, Buñuel, who obviously a fellow countryman and contemporary of Erice's. It's cinema that has a transcendental nature, kind of what Roger Ebert used to call these directors that are beyond the usual director. They're transcendental. They're messianic almost, is what he calls them. Not in a hyper religious sense, but in the sense that they're trying to reach for something deeper and, as I just said, transcendental with their movies. And Close Your Eyes feels like a wonderful continuation of what he started with Spirit of the Beehive. We see a filmmaker and a person, an individual who's grown, who's had experiences, more memories that now feed into his new film. In fact, and a nice bit of trivia for fans of the previous movies, the great Spanish actress Ana Torrent reappears. She was a young girl in Spirit of the Beehive. she was a famous child actress back then in Spain. She was also in an amazing movie called Cría Cuervos by one of Erice's great contemporaries, Carlos Saura, who went on, those weird things that happen in the trajectories of these filmmakers. Erice kind of disappeared into the background while Saura has he died last year, but he was constantly making movies that were gaining international acclaim, some more than others, but the guy was always working and keeping his name in the limelight of Spanish cinema, especially with his series of musical films like Tango and Flamenco and Fados. Whereas Erice as he's been making clear in interviews about Close Your Eyes, he didn't disappear. He stayed busy. It's just that he focused more on shorts and museum exhibits and, the kind of video presentations you see at art galleries. Just the way fate works, just getting the funding for another feature became complicated. I mean, anyone out there who's tried to make a movie knows how it's a bizarre mixture of luck, savviness, being at the right place in the right time to get a movie made. But hey, the point is the guy never stopped, and now he's back with this movie that's quite something, quite a work.
Before we even get to Close Your Eyes, you mentioned Anna Torrent, and in Spirit of the Beehive, we might have, and I try to avoid hyperbole because everyone does it, but I think my sentiment here, it feels earnest and honest. It might be one of the greatest performances from a child actor I've ever seen.
Oh, I think that's widely acknowledged, though. I mean, I think for big cinephiles, that there's just no question that's one of the great child performances of all time. I mean, better than Nana Paquin in The Piano and all these other kind of, typically cited child performances.
And same with her sister in the movie Isabel. Two fantastic performances that I genuinely don't know how Erice was able to get that from them. And in El Sur,
yeah.
I was
right.
so impressed with. There's an 8-year-old and I believe like a 15-year-old in the film. A very different kind of movie, but also tapping into. I guess the best way I could describe it and what makes his film so special. He's one of a rare breed of directors because you do have surrealism and you do have abstract film, which is conveying emotions in themes through the abstraction itself. But what Erice does is he tries to convey these profoundly internal and spiritual and emotional concepts, but also stages in life.
Well,
and the very process of growing up. The abstract idea of life itself in narrative features in a way that is so three-dimensional and so rich, and he conveys that through these just exquisite performances.
Well, it's that I think the trick is funny enough, I think my suspicion is he just doesn't over-direct these children because he's creating this environment that's already, through the cinematography and through the blocking and the staging of the scenes, he's creating this particular ambiance, and I think the trick is he lets the children just be children. And what I mean by that is he taps into how when you're a kid, and I mean a kid, I mean we're talking here ranging between 7 and 8, 9 years old or something, the world feels like a haze. It feels very dreamy because you're kind of discovering the world without quite comprehending it yet. You see the adults carrying out certain actions that you don't really know how to process because you don't know what it is yet because you haven't lived through adult life yet. So everything feels mysterious in a way. Everything feels, it's akin to how when you're a child, and I'm sure all of us have had this happen at some point in life, you remember a certain space or a certain place, whether it's a former home or whether it's a former place you would frequent as a child. You remember it in different dimensions, right? It might seem bigger in your memory, but then when you go back as an adult, you realize, oh, this park is actually small, or this neighborhood I used to frequent when I was a child is actually much smaller and less grander than when I was 8.
Or how we view our parents.
Yeah.
And in Spirit of the Beehive in El Sur, that's one of the undercurrents, the major themes of those films, how children view the adult world.
Yeah.
How do we process disconnection and fear and, as you said, these uncomfortable spaces that we might internalize, because children are very perceptive, but because they haven't had a lot of life experience, they don't know how to consciously process exactly what it is they're feeling or observing.
Yeah.
But they're observing it and they know that something's off.
Yeah, and something that the Spirit of the Beehive, for example, has in relation to Cría Cuervos, which is beautifully done, but different. It's a different tone, different approach. But one thing they both explore is how the children may not know that they live in let's say, in an authoritarian state, but the mood starts infecting them. So they start acting out in strange ways. The children start even carrying out not brutal, but semi-acts of violence, like little acts of tension that start coming out.
Well, that really terrific scene between Anna and Isabel when Isabel is on the floor next to the broken pot.
Oh, yes. That
10-minute sequence that you're just like, you are in that haze, like, whoa,
is she okay?
What's going on? And of course, in the previous scene, we have that great single of Isabel, I assume older sister. They're not twins, so older sister with the cat.
Yes.
Where it's like she's definitely grappling with some demons, and then you have that whole scene play out, and I mean it's so it's haunting. It feels like a ghost story.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it is a ghost story in a way, because the children don't realize they're being haunted by everything that's been going on in the society of their parents, right? Which we see manifest later on violently with a Spanish partisan who shows up to their estate.
And just to give a little context for Spirit of the Beehive, it takes place in 1940.
Yeah. So the war just ended, basically, in Spain, yeah.
Which war would that be, precisely for our audience who might not know a little bit of Spanish history?
Oh, well, the Spanish Civil War, which it's important to take into account this history, not just with Erice's cinema, but Spanish cinema. I compare it a lot to cinema that comes out of the Southern Cone, like Chile and Argentina. These societies were so impacted by the conflicts and dictatorships they underwent that whether you're talking about soap operas or dramas or action movies, they can't help but be infused with references to that history. And Spirit of the Beehive, one thing that made it so bold in 1973 was that the regime that took power during the Spanish Civil War was still in power. And yeah, for those who aren't, versed in the history, the Spanish Civil War was the conflict that happened right before World War II. It was actually a prologue to World War II in the 1930s between the Spanish Republic, which was a coalition of liberal to left-leaning parties, and the fascists led by this General Francisco Franco.
Franco, 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 el soldado sin igual. Franco, 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 es el hombre excepcional. Franco,
against the Republic. He was supported by the Nazis, by Nazi Germany. The U.S. pretty much stayed out of it, and the Republic could really only get aid from the Soviet Union and a sprinkle of aid from countries like Mexico.
However, there actually were some fighters from the U.S. who formed the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, who fought to preserve democracy.
I mean, including some famous guys tried to get involved, like, you may recognize these names, like Ernest Hemingway. They were deeply impacted by the Spanish Civil War,
So it's a huge event, and I think it is important we establish this now because even directors like Almodovar.
His recent one, Parallel Mothers, which is all about how Spain is still processing the family members who disappeared during that conflict, and people still trying to find the bodies and try to find closure. And this is a conflict that's already almost 90 years in the past. Well, yeah, it is like 90 years in the past now. But it shows you how, well, think about it. If in the U.S. we still haven't resolved a lot of the Civil War that was 160 years ago, imagine Spain, like Chile, Argentina, El Salvador, processing stuff that's a few decades in the past by comparison.
Well, there's that great scene in El Sur when Estrella is talking to
Milagros, played by Rafaela Aparicio, who starts sharing about why the young girl's father, the young girl Estrella, who's played by Sonsoles Aranguren, they start talking about why Estrella's father had a falling out with his father, right, with Estrella's grandfather. And Milagros, in this very beautiful grandmotherly way, is almost trying to explain the Civil War, right, and what the Civil War was about. But she just assumes this little girl isn't going to comprehend all the complexities of it. And we can assume the dad was probably a communist or maybe an anarchist, which were the two most radical factions in the war. And it's very beautiful. It kind of shows the wounds that are still in the society, but that are kept under the rug now. They're kind of kept in the closet while everyone's just trying to carry on with everyone's just trying to carry on a normal life.
And that also plays into the father's arc in that disconnection between Estrella and her father.
It's a beautiful metaphor too for, in a way, generational trauma. And I know the word is overused these days, but in this case, the father's carrying the baggage of a lost cause, in the sense that, one of the great tragedies of the Spanish Civil War and why it is still, it's still discussed on a different level than World War II, is because in the Spanish Civil War, you had this literally a clash of ideologies, fascism versus this struggle to make a socialist or anarchist future. And a lot of people died really believing they were trying to build this new world. And then the survivors were just left with this immense heartbreak, right? Which is why in El Sur, the father is, I don't want to spoil, but he's driven to an extreme choice, because how does one carry on, right? And even if you have a family, if you believe so passionately in a particular ideology of the world, on how to change the world, how do you carry on when everything is so dark, right? Like, darkness just kind of rules everything. And on a personal note, I mean, I've been feeling that same mood in regards to Gaza, right? Like, what more can you say in a world that's so dark, right? Where it kind of seems that fascism is ascending. And I mean, you can argue and fight on and spread information to people, but what is hope? And later on, World War II would come and Nazi Germany would be overthrown. But, I mean, in the case of the Spaniards, Franco would stay in power well into the 70s when Erice started making his his movies. And all of that is infused in his work, including in his new movie. Close Your Eyes begins with one of the best teases I've ever seen, right? This idea that it starts with an anarchist after World War II showing up to the home of a wealthy Sephardic Jew who needs help finding his daughter who has disappeared into Shanghai. So he wants this older anarchist to go search for her. And in a sense, he's giving him purpose again. You know, he's kind of telling him, you're a fighter. I know you're a guy who wants to be out there doing something. So I'm giving you this chance. And then Erice pulls the rug from under us. And it turns out that's not the movie we're watching. That's footage from an unfinished film directed by the actual main character of the movie, who is this older filmmaker who has been grappling with the fact that the lead actor of his movie vanished while they were filming. He just disappeared. And now, 20 years later, the movie takes place in 2012. Now, 20-something years later, after that failed movie shoot, it's like he gets the chance to go find him again. And it's a movie you don't want to spoil because you want people to kind of absorb it as they watch it. But there's that running theme of the past, how it stays with us, how some people will, fine, you moved on with your life, but the events that marked you, they stay there. It's kind of, you can't really apply that cliche of, hey, we'll just move on, to certain things.
And this secondary thread that connects all his works, which is the application of films within films.
Yeah.
And in this case, this unfinished film, which takes on an even greater significance because it's the author injecting his own life experience into the film. Because El Sur, as great as it turned out, is famously unfinished.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those unfinished gems because of the typical thing a lot of great artists deal with. Cinema is a strange dance between commerce and creativity, and you could be making a genuine work of poetry, but an investor will pull out, or a producer tries to impose a different vision on the thing. It's a miracle directors like Bergman made the kinds of movies they made. Tarkovsky, ironically, got lucky that the Soviet Union liked to use him as an example that they were building actual culture, so they kind of let him do his thing, while the domestic Russian population preferred, soap operas and all that stuff. But in general, it's very, very difficult. And Erice, again, the movie is infused with so many personal details, including the great tease at the beginning, because in real life, he really was going to make a thriller set in Shanghai that fell apart at the last minute because the money people pulled out. And, he kind of just had to wander around working and staying busy while seeing when he could make another feature. And in recent interviews, he talks about the irony that the funding for this movie actually came together very quickly. I don't know, maybe it's because costs are more manageable when Erice was working. When he started working, funding a movie, you had to also invest in film and film equipment. Now with digital, it's a little easier to get something going if you have the proper connections and funds. So yeah, it's a very, very the director and the main character of the film is, you could say he even kind of looks like Erice, and it's almost like a mirror reflection of him, as this artist who's he's known for his one, in the movie, he's known for his one poetry book that he published, or his one novel that he published when he was younger that gained a bunch of acclaim, but then he never wrote another one. And his unfinished Shanghai thriller was going to be his directorial debut, but it also never finished. So it's almost like he knows he's good, he knows he's great, but life intervened in interesting ways to keep him from reaching that pinnacle of, in Erice's case, his two works are classics, but he wasn't he didn't spend decades as a festival darling like Sauda, or gain the universal acclaim of Almodóvar, who's still making good films, but sometimes can threaten to become a parody of himself because he's become such a celebrity, So rarely do we get a director making a great story that's also in a way a confessional, I would say. There's the characters that surround this guy are also characters Erice has probably bumped into in real life, right?
The cinematographer.
Yes.
He was my favorite character in the whole film. Just those moments where he gives the main character advice, and he's like, "Oh, I'll worry about that later." And the friend and cinematographer says, "Oh, you never take my advice. It's been 30 years that way."
And he collects all those film cans, and he's like a devotee of cinema. And he has those great lines like, what does he say? What's he say? What's that great line in the movie where he says something about Carl Dreyer, where he says like, "Oh, no one takes cinema seriously since Carl Dreyer died," or something. And I mean, and then also again the other characters that surround the lead, like former lovers that were close to him and to his disappeared actor.
Yes, I actually want to talk about that because, oh my God, that scene between... So, to set up this scene, he's walking through the streets in Madrid. The main character does not live in Madrid, but
Right.
he's helping with like a true crime series. He actually lives on the coast. He likes fishing. His neighbors are this young couple who are expecting a child. So he's in Madrid.
I'd love to live in that place. That place looks cool as hell.
And he's walking down the street, and they have this outdoor bookstore, and he finds a book that he wrote and dedicated to
His
a
one book,
former lover. And that scene when he reconnects with her and she starts playing the piano, it's one of those scenes that's just it's so spectacular.
Well, because it's got this beautiful maturity. The former lover is played by the great Argentine actress Soledad Villamil, who, again, if you're a fan of international cinema, you may recognize the name because she's appeared in a lot of great films, including the great Argentine thriller The Secret in Their Eyes. And they have this wonderful exchange where, if it was an American movie, they'd probably try to give the audience some candy. We're like, oh, look, they're reconnecting, and maybe they're gonna get together again, and maybe they're gonna make love or something by the fireplace. No, it just becomes like a wonderful conversation between two people who share memories and are connected as well through the strange disappearance of their mutual friend. And it's a beautiful scene about how not every former tryst or every former connection has to grow bitter with time or has to feel awkward, right? How you can really just catch up with someone and pick up, at least emotionally, from where you left off, in the sense that that friendship was genuine. It was always there. There's no weirdness in the air.
But what adds such richness and depth in this film, with everything, is that it also tackles that there's a profound melancholy in sadness, and that's what that combination of time and memory
What
does,
could have been, yeah.
right? That they're having this great moment, but they you can tell just in the performances that when a character brings something up, that they internalize all those. It's kind of this concept of umami, but of memory, that they're processing all of that. And
well, the what could have been, that idea of, we don't like to think about it in life, but it's that situation of, if they had been together, maybe it would have worked out. Maybe it wouldn't have, but it's those could have been. Sometimes the people and I don't want to sound too novelistic here, but sometimes the person you should have been with, you didn't end up with, or sometimes someone should have loved this person, but it wasn't meant to be. It reminded me of actually a very beautiful chapter in Oliver Stone's recent memoirs, Chasing the Light, where he talks about his first wife, who was this Lebanese woman named Najwa Sarkis, who lives in New York in the same apartment still that they shared in the 70s, and he writes about how they actually got along great. They got along very well, and they actually had a very nice marriage, but he wanted to pursue being a filmmaker, and she was happy just working for the Moroccan embassy in New York, where she has still been working for like the last 40-something years. And he says that he still, he says that now in his old age, he still goes to her apartment and they sit down and chat, and that sometimes there's sadness in the air because, it didn't have to end, but that's just how life worked out, right? And in this case, you get that as well in this scene. It's like, well, you could tell they got along great, but life happens, as they say. And a lot of movies don't like to touch on that because we prefer the happy ending, or we in America, we want to walk out of the movie feeling like the good guys always win, and true love is nothing can get in the way of it, and even though the divorce rate is like 78%.
We want simplistic answers.
Yeah, exactly.
Or we want something so vague, we're just projecting our own insecurities and fears onto them. I'm already thinking of 100 movies. But even the way that scene ends, after she plays the song, she just stops. I don't remember she looks back at him, but she just very sadly just closes the lid of the piano, and we get everything. Yeah.
Well, life is fine, but life goes on. It's great they reconnected. It's not going to become a fairy tale ending. Some people might have that kind of ending. Some don't. But it's okay. It's fine. It's not, they haven't hurt each other. They haven't, because what really connects them is their missing friend, who in this case, the actor played by Jose Coronado, he lingers like a ghost in their memories. He lingers like a presence. Because at least, again, I don't want to spoil, but for most of the first two acts, the idea is no one knows if he's dead or alive. No one knows what the hell happened. There are just unexplained things like that, even in our hyper internet and world,
And the only memory of this guy's in the heads of individuals or what's on film.
Yes.
Which, again, we're not trying to spoil, but my God, how the end of the film, how the film ends, it's a masterclass in filmmaking.
One, a beautiful testament that connects back to Spirit of the Beehive in expressing the power of cinema, right?
And El Sur.
And El Sur, yes.
Both of them, all of his films.
This idea that cinema becomes an art form that can change you, but also marks time and preserves memories. Not always of people but there are moments in my life that when I think back to them, well, as a film person, right, I think back to a certain period in my life, and I also think about the movies that I remember from that time, the movies that impacted me in that particular moment in my life. We just went through the anniversary of 9/11, and everybody was talking about it, and yesterday and on TV and on the internet. And honestly, what I was thinking about more was the movies I remember watching in the year 2001, the stuff that was coming out, the albums I was listening to. And Erice knows how to tap into that, and how for an artist, the art they make also becomes the ultimate record of who they were at that moment in time and what was going on in their life.
And who they share it with.
Yeah.
And then it's not just in film, which of course is this running theme in Erice's films themselves, but all art.
Yeah.
For example, music. Not only the diegetic music in Close Your Eyes, but the scores of Spirit of the Beehive and El Sur. In Close Your Eyes, I'm just thinking of that other great scene when it's late night and these neighbors and good friends are having some drinks, and he starts playing the guitar and sings this American song.
Oh, it's a wonderful scene.
And it's the whole song. And it's just this moment of, it's this one moment in time where everyone is just there.
But what's beautiful about that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's a great example of how Erice is one of these great directors that paces the film so exquisitely, so perfectly, that he is an example of how a slow burner should actually work, right? Where, yes, there's not a shootout every 2 minutes, the movie doesn't have cheap twists, but something is still happening on the screen in every scene. There's still something going on. Not it doesn't languish, there's still life going on in every scene. So in moments like that, we're still learning about the characters. We're still learning about the director's world. We're still learning about where he lives. We get these little side details that still enrich the world of the movie. Like, we find out, well, I guess small spoiler alert, but we find out that this wonderful seaside place he's living in is probably going to get gentrified soon. So it seems idyllic, but even that has a way of suddenly changing.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think it's not the theme of the film. I think what's so special about Erice is he tackles so many themes. And I'll put a pin in that to talk about why he is a great director and why we have so many posers and imitators.
Oh, yeah.
A movie about nothing that you tell the audience, well, it could be about these things. It's what you take from it. That's not being a good director. That's not being a good writer. What Erice does, it's a lot of different powerful themes, and it's all in the film. It's just not necessarily about one. It's about all of them, but you need to extract that yourself. It won't be spoon-fed to you. It's in the text. It's all in the text. If there's one thing I want anyone to get from this podcast, these directors, Erice, Bergman, Tarkovsky, you know why they're greats? Because they know how to use, well, you just mentioned pacing, but also how to condense, how to weave in loss and memory, and how things change over time. All these just incredibly important and timely themes, right? Timeless, timely.
Yeah, and how, and I love how he defies the usual cliches. I love how it feels like, again, channeling himself into the material. It feels like a genuine film about also an artist looking back. I love how when they talk about the actor, who's named Julio, the disappeared actor, I love how they talk about Julio's escapades. He was a heavy drinker. He was a big skirt chaser. But it's not judgmental. They're kind of just looking back with affection of like, oh yeah, because it's tragic that Julio just disappeared and maybe he lost his mind or maybe something happened to him. And they're not thinking back on like, oh yeah, well, he, in an American movie, it would have been like, well, of course he disappeared. The guy was like a crazy party animal. Here it's like, no, it's just who he was, especially in that environment.
Yes, memory and connection is so important. But just like your home and your land might be sold, over time,
Yeah.
things fade away, relationships fade away, people pass away, you lose touch. The main character, slight spoiler, but it's important that I mention that his son passes away
Yeah.
or passed away.
Passed away. Yeah.
And that's also looming in the film, and that we use memory to keep those connections alive, but not in a way to reject reality, but in a way to help embrace that in life, right? So many facets of our world will change, often beyond our control.
Exactly.
And how do we make peace with that? How do we find ways to keep certain emotions, honest emotions, alive?
And in a way that makes the film, again, the main references everyone's using is, the Spanish master is back after 3 decades. But honestly, I think this movie has a lot to say to younger people now, because in particular millennials, I've been thinking about this because of, a lot of the movies coming out recently, including some we've seen together. There's this obsession right now with the ticking clock, right? Because millennials have just had a different way of growing up, and the world is kind of shifting under our feet all the time.
You just mentioned 9/11.
Yeah.
I'm on the younger end of the millennial slider, but I do remember my first day of school was 9/11, and how, as a kid, I didn't know what 9/11 was, but everything felt off that day. And Gen Z, a lot of Gen Z was born after that.
Yeah, and
Gen Alpha too.
Oh, well, Gen Alpha will have zero connection to 9/11 in their memories, but we're very concerned with the passage of time, especially because we're a late bloomer generation because of so many factors. The change in the world economy, the change in culture, this idea that now we can live longer, right? So being 30 doesn't mean what it used to mean. Being 40 doesn't mean what it used to mean. 50, that's kind of pushing it. I think 50, I wouldn't say you're old, but I think that's always going to be like you are, middle-aged. But we're concerned with these. There's a fear about the passage of time, which, I mean, you saw it in this movie we actually saw this week. If you check out our reviews on YouTube, you'll see our review of it, My Old Ass. This new movie, the title sounds funny, but it's a poignant film about 18-year-old all of a sudden shrooming and meeting her 39-year-old self from the future. And, there was another movie earlier this summer that I really liked, Dee Dee, made by this director in his 30s, looking back at what it was like to be an adolescent in 2008. So there's this constant obsession with trying to stop the clock almost. I think a movie like Close Your Eyes, there's something comforting about that idea that whether it's Erice himself and the movie, that you have to keep living, right? You can't stop. You kind of have to just keep going because time is precious. It is true. You can't get the years you've lost that have already gone by, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't stop. Like you have to just keep living. It's okay to reflect on moments in the past, because as with history, the more we learn about the past, the more prepped we are for the future, and the better we understand ourselves. But that doesn't mean it's too late to change, try new things, find that person you lost contact with.
Well, speaking of which, and I promise no spoilers, but the very beautiful third act, which deals with that interesting intersection of what if, let's say, you rediscover a long-lost friend, except they're not that person anymore. They don't have a recollection of being that person.
Yeah.
How do you grapple with that?
Yeah, what if they don't remember you?
Which brings in the great Anna Torrent.
Yes. Yes. Yes, exactly. Who she's the daughter of Julio, and actually my brain took a second to, because in my mind when I think of Anna Torrent, I'm always thinking of the child from Spirit of the Beehive and the Sauda movie I mentioned, Cría Cuervos. So it was kind of for to translate, it's called Raising Crows. That's the name of the meaning of the title, and I'm connecting it to all the stuff Erice does too. It's a Spanish saying that says, if you raise crows, they'll eventually peck your eyes out. A brilliant veiled reference again to fascist Spain. But in my mind, that's who she is all the time. It's that child from those early films. So when she first appears in this movie, meeting at a diner with Miguel, the director.
Not a diner. Very important, the location. It's the El Prado National Museum in Madrid.
Oh, you're right. I'm thinking of the booths they were sitting in. In my mind, booths and tables with coffee. Yes, it's a.
For those who don't know, it's the National Museum of Spain, but this is where you can probably find the biggest collection of the most famous painters. If you want to see El Greco, they probably have the largest collection of El Greco. They have all of Goya's black paintings there.
Oh, yeah.
So, in a way, it's this history of Spain, and that's where they're meeting.
Well, like the symbolism, right? It's like staging a meeting at the British Museum or something, and evoking that history. I've never been to the museum in Madrid, but yeah, I know what you mean. It's supposed to be amazing. I'm poor as fuck. I never go anywhere, but it's supposed to be an astounding place. And again, it's that connection to the idea of the history, whether it's national, intimate, it nurtures us, right? Sometimes unconsciously. And it's a wonderful scene where they're both catching up, but they're talking about what might have happened to Julio, and Miguel kind of reveals that he's been invited to go on a true crime show in Spain to talk about the case, and he's given them the rights to the remaining film footage of the movie. And you think that it's going to develop into, I don't know, a kind of thriller like a Spanish version of Zodiac or something. No, the way they end up using the Ana Torres character, it becomes very moving, and it all connects these threads of.
It even calls back to Spirit of the Beehive when she says, "Soy Ana."
Yes, exactly. Again, it's like Erice himself can't. You can tell this is a haunted director, and I don't mean haunted even in like the Bergman-esque sense. I think he is the kind of artist that every film he makes, and will continue making, let us hope. He's in his 80s, but he can keep going. Hey, Clint's got another movie. He's got his final movie coming out later this year, and he's like 94 or something.
Clint and Woody Allen, they put stuff out, and it's like, good job, Grandpa.
Exactly. Glad to see you're getting your steps in. But what's special about Erice is he is an artist that I think he cannot separate himself from the work. I could not see this guy ever directing like an impersonal Marvel movie, right? I think if they hired him to do a Marvel movie, it would still somehow become semi-autobiographical, or it would still have some kind of reference. I'm kidding, of course. This is never going to happen.
Nor should it.
But my point is, he's incapable of impersonal art. Some good directors can do it, but some don't.
But not in an egotistical way.
No,
which is very
not,
important. No. Unlike, I don't know. I'm gonna just touch top of the head Iñárritu.
Oh my God, yeah. Actually, yes. I think this is a great. If you're teaching a film class, and you want to show the difference between sincerity and narcissism, you should screen Bardo with Close Your Eyes. It would take all day because both movies are quite long.
Except one feels perfectly paced, and, well, you said the other one, it feels like going through hell.
Oh, it's a slog. Yeah. I mean, Bardo is one of those movies that feels like 5 minutes feels like 10 hours or something. It's one of those movies. And, well, but see, that's the thing. Erice is sincerely sharing things. Iñárritu and Bardo was trying too hard to essentially craft an idea of himself that borders on the farcical, right? He's trying to convince you he's a suffering, genius. Whereas Erice doesn't have to do that. He's just sincerely telling a story that's sharing about himself as well.
Because he's also exploring universal themes of unfinished endings.
It's like when Bergman would write novels about his parents. Bergman, and also in his movies, Bergman was famously a preacher's son, which is why his cinema is infused with this. I mean, he abandoned the church very quickly in his youth, but still, he
abandoned the religious church, but then crafted his church through film.
Yes, exactly, but he shares about it in his films. This idea of guilt, this idea of transcendence, this idea of metaphysical questions about existence.
Oh, Persona, for example. Oh my God.
Persona, Soft Light, the Cries and Whispers. But and in his books, he actually wrote some beautiful novels about his parents' courtship in Sweden. And he's never, you don't read the books, you don't watch the movies feeling that he's struggling to convince you I'm a suffering genius or something, it's
he's not trying to keep the walls of the artificial house or construction of self built.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're trying to share something honest, something real, something that is important to you, you can always tell. It's just something I think over time I've become more sensitive to. When I watch something that's honest and you can feel the aura of the director in there. I mean, this one, Close Your Eyes, I'm just sitting there watching it, and especially the ending, which we'll talk about in vague terms. You're just like, this incredible feeling of, does filmmaking get better than this?
Yeah, and another comparison I'll make that's very, very, very different from Bergman or Erice also is in the way Paul Schrader's channeling his own self into his work. He's because he also grew up in a very Calvinist conservative home and stuff. But again, he's channeling it into the work. And in that same style,
to a different effect, we could argue, but it's still there, that attempt to make sense of certain darkness and conflict.
Or the way Malick channels his childhood into Tree of Life, his own childhood in Texas. And you could even say To the Wonder, not as successful as Tree of Life, but in To the Wonder, he's exploring his own failed relationships and his own failed marriages. Erice, you can tell in this movie, is trying to say something about having been a director who's probably seen a lot and met a lot of people and absorbed many lives and almost 50 years of making movies and working. He's probably had experiences that have haunted him or that have lingered with him. And we have those lives that we bump into that some met tragic ends. Some have stayed as great friendships.
Some we may never reclaim.
Yeah.
Which leads us to this third act, which brings in Ana Torrent's character again. And again, we're trying to leave what happens spoiler free, because if you can tell already, you got to see this movie. Go
Yes.
find it.
Yes.
Drive 2 hours each way to see it.
And it's probably going to be streaming soon, I imagine. I'm thinking, but please go see it in a theater. Like go just take an afternoon to give this movie your time at an art house.
But reclamation of identity, crafting
Yeah.
new identity, and how that connects to what art can do, and how the ending of the film is. I got concerned that it would lead to something very cliche, but oh my God, just such a beautiful ending.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of the best way to describe or go into a little bit more detail how
Well-
to bring this all together without giving
Well,
anything away.
I mean, I would describe it as the plot reaches a crescendo where Miguel, the director, tries to find a resolution. He tries to see if he can heal what happened with Julio by using the footage of his unfinished movie. And that's all I'll say, because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's almost like the work he had made with his friend might be
Unfinished work.
Yes, the unfinished work he had made with his friend might be the last chance to find closure to what happened, to bring some form of closure. And it's a magical moment because again, it's a beautiful evocation of how when you do something special with someone, that can almost become an unbreakable link with that individual, regardless of what happened after you both worked on this special project.
It transcends, let's say, a renewal of connection.
Yeah.
The fact that this film, this art, reaches everybody in the scene, the last scene. We won't tell you exactly what happens, who's there. But the fact that you can see on their expressions that what they're seeing is affecting them in profoundly unique ways, that is more important than anything that might happen after the reel is done. And in fact, what we see in that reel, it's the first time we as the audience ever see it. It's also just like,
it's stunning. I mean, and there's a melancholy to it too, because the footage that when we finally get to see like more footage of this thriller that Miguel was making, it's not just some throwaway thriller. It was like a very powerful piece of film that almost blurs the line between reality, in other words, the real-time story taking place in the movie, and the fiction of this movie that Miguel was trying to make. And again, it's almost like it comes full circle to what Close Your Eyes itself is doing, blurring that line between fiction and Erice's own life. He's doing that within the movie with the story.
Between participant, spectator, subject in the film.
Yeah, like how much, like, and it raises the question of how do you rank good art in terms of mere craft or something personal, right? You can have a director make a very slick, polished film without any of themselves in it, right? So you may enjoy it, but you won't really feel anything, as opposed to something that you kind of feel, whether you like these directors or not. You get that from directors like Herzog, Kubrick, Buñuel, Stone, very different styles, very different themes, but you feel an urgency in the work where it's the director also trying to say something about the world, about this particular story that's also deeply them, right? It's also deeply personal to them. You even get that a little bit with I've always defended her on this in this sense, Sofia Coppola. I mean, you get that from her movies as well. You get the feeling that whether good or not so good, all her movies are about something connected to her life. And the ending of Close Your Eyes, really beautifully touches on that, of how much, would this movie have worked with the same effect if it had been made by someone disconnected from the subject and from the subject matter in the script? Frankly, I don't think this movie could have been made by anyone else. I just don't think it could have happened. I don't think it would have. It could be. I don't think it could exist in the hands of someone else.
To kind of close this out, one thing that I found particularly masterful in the direction was the use of eye lines.
Oh,
and
yeah.
How many scenes are basically paragraphs of dialogue all conveyed through the eyes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the power of genuine expression. And how Erice does not have to depend on, how do I put this? The camera doesn't always have to be mobile to make a scene dynamic. It's all in the framing, the eye line, the performances, which are so crucial to how the movie comes across.
As in what a director should do.
Yeah. No,
that's their purpose.
It's a very special film, to say the least. Close Your Eyes. Check it out at your local art house. Be on the lookout for it when it streams. I'll even say we'll probably be talking more about this movie come end of the year, when we look back at the best films or the most notable movies that impacted us throughout the year. This one, for me, would rank very high on my year-end list. It was a breath of fresh air to see it when we saw it, especially after a summer that, in terms of even popcorn entertainment, was bland, to say the least. This was not a very memorable summer, movie wise.
Depends where you looked.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Guess what? We actually have an episode about what the summer was and how animation took the throne in our eyes.
Oh no, but I mean, no, and I agree. But I mean, what I mean is the gems, the genuine jewels we found were far in between. Genuine transcendental cinema like this movie, that's very rare. And when you find it, it's a very special experience.
And embrace it. And I think part of what history films try and teach us is that embrace uncertainty. Embrace that you may not have all the answers.
Yeah.
Embrace that you may have more questions after watching The Spirit of the Beehive, El Sur. Even Close Your Eyes.
Well, it's like a good novel. Just, fine. You may not totally get the Brothers Karamazov the first time you read it, but that's the point. It reminds me of something Oprah, of all people, once said when she read Beloved by Toni Morrison, and that she asked Morrison, I really don't get like this part of the book. What do I do? And that Toni Morrison said, well, darling, that's called reading. Just go over it again. It's there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that
don't feel frustrated by it. Don't fight it. And that's when I know, for me, that I've met a very special match in film. Hopefully people too.
Yeah.
You want to go back and you want to learn more.
Yeah.
The next time I watch Spirit of the Beehive, whenever that is, what life have I lived before going in that will make me understand it more? And then ask new questions about it.
Well, I love you brought that up because I myself had not seen all of Spirit of the Beehive in many years. I'll put it this way. When I saw it the first time, I was in my early 20s. And then I don't know, it's just a lot of movies to watch. So I returned to it now in my late 30s. And yeah, I mean, it was still a special experience. But now I was watching it as somebody who wasn't as young. I wasn't a 21-year-old anymore. So now what I took from it was different. It was actually richer. I knew more about the Spanish Civil War. I knew more about Spain. I got certain allegories and ambiguities better. And that, to me, is the mark of a good film. When you watch it again, and it's actually more enriching when you return to it a few years later. As opposed to bad movies where, we've all had this experience where something that we really liked when we were 18, we'll watch it again in our 30s and be sitting there thinking, oh, why was I into this when I was 17 or 18 years old? This movie's awful. What's wrong with this?
Yeah, I even see that in myself. We both have Letterboxd accounts. I have been logging virtually every movie that I've seen since 2015. And my best of the year list of 2015, I would never rank those probably as my best now. But I'm not going to change that list because I also use it as a time capsule to see where I was. My best of the year last year and this year, hopefully, will have a very different set of films than when I was 19, right? And that's a lot of what Close Your Eyes is about. We're all a product of all our life experiences, and we shouldn't forsake that. Our mistakes, our loss, the tragedy, the mistakes. It's important to feel regret. It's important to feel embarrassed. It's important when we think upon and reflect with those memories and with people who we've shared those memories with at this stage that we're now at a different point. Maybe not a radically different point, but we're still at a different point in our lives. And as we continue to go on, we'll have a new set of experiences, and that will inform the way that we move forward.
No, I agree. In fact, my letterbox, you're right. I'll go back to my very, very, very first entries on there. And yeah, there's a couple of movies now. I won't say which ones, but there's a couple of movies now where I'll go back and think, why did I give that the full 5 stars? What was going on? And today I'd probably give that movie a 3 or maybe even a 2.5. There were movies that I would give more a higher rating now too than back then. It's just we change, we shift, we keep going, and this is a wonderful film about. Eventually, it becomes a wonderful film about the life process. And well, go check it out. Please check out also our latest previews on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up. We are about to jump into our Halloween special. You know it's that time of this. It's pumpkin spice season, so we've got a nice surprise coming up. It's not the kind of movie you would usually see on these lists. I don't know how many of you were surprised last year by our choice, which was Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein. We were trying to do something a little different back then, and
the whole 90s
monster
thing. We speaking of change, we like to bring something new for these specials.
Yeah.
Films we want to talk about, but also that the episode itself, all our episodes will feel different because of the subject that we're covering.
Yeah.
So this one, which we'll announce soon, it's going to be a very, very interesting one. We'll give a little tease. We're going to get a little spooky and involve a little bit of TV.
And this is not a spoiler at all, but I'm excited to do it because it's also one of those where I've noticed Gen Z rediscovering it. I'm seeing more memes around this particular title. So stay tuned. It's going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about it's going to be actually a lot of fun to talk about. We're going to be talking about a lot of interesting stuff. And another little tease I'll give is even the music stands out with this one. So it's going to be a fun one that might send you looking for the soundtrack.
Indeed. And then at least on our calendar of our big episodes, we'll have an election special.
Oh,
which, if you think that we've gone political in X-Men 97, you have seen nothing yet. And you will see nothing until we start our next huge project, which let's just say,
I was gonna rock the boat.
If you were already on the fence with us, we will probably lock that door forever. But no regrets.
Yeah, we'll make friends and lose some. I think with our next big one,
and everything in between. We got a lot of do we recommends. Let's just say that in October, the spooky season. Another little hint of something we might cover. Let's just say it's the second remake of a Stephen King book
with long fangs. So yeah, you might already know what we're talking about. And of course, spooky season overlaps with the beginning of award season. So it's going to be a lot of big titles to cover. It's going to be it's been a kind of a slow year because the industry's been a bit on a slowdown, and we're still dealing with the aftermath of the strikes last year. However, Hollywood has been saving quite a lot of notable titles to throw at us to close out the year. So be on the lookout for a lot of returning big directors, a lot of fresh faces that are starting to make names for themselves.
Some anime adaptations of classic books and beloved film series, and a not so beloved other film series that's part of the same series. So we got a lot. Stay tuned.
And remember to also hit up Purist Mushrooms at puristmushrooms.com for your dietary supplements. 10% off any packets you order, individual packets that you grab at their website. Just throw in our discount code Breaking180 at the checkout. And on that note,
keep thinking critically,
keep watching,
and enjoy movies.